Hey, welcome to Crossroads. The Chinese Communist Party is launching a new campaign to charm foreign leaders and investors. And this comes in the wake of the CCP's top-level meetings of the Third Plenum, a gathering of China's roughly 370-person Central Committee, which is the largest of the party's top decision-making bodies. Now, this meeting is where the regime sets the major policies for the year ahead and beyond. And in this Third Plenum, they outlined an economic goal of domestic production, but gave actually very little in terms of practical steps on fixing the damaged Chinese economy. But while the CCP appears to be trying to form new deals, another crisis for the regime is looming in the background. The United States is planning to announce new sanctions on the Chinese Communist Party. And this is after NATO determined that the Communist Party in China, its support for Russia, is enabling the war in Ukraine. Now, first off, on the charm campaign. Now, look, with the current presidential elections, former President Donald Trump said just over the weekend during a rally in Grand Rapids, Michigan, that CCP leader Xi Jinping personally wrote him a letter. And this was allegedly in light of the attempted assassination on Trump's life. Trump said that Xi Jinping, quote, wrote me a beautiful note the other day when he heard about what had happened. Now, the CCP's envoy to Washington is now calling for a softening of relations. In addition to this, he framed this as a wish for friendship and cooperation during comments made at the 6th U.S.-China Sister Cities Summit in Tacoma on Friday. And he said, we expect to see more visits, contacts, and exchanges so that drop by drop we can thaw the ice of misunderstanding and ultimately form a vast ocean of friendship between our two peoples. Now, briefly on that, it seems what the CCP is trying to do with the Sister City program is very similar to what the CCP is doing by targeting individual countries within the European Union. The Chinese Communist Party understands that the European Union itself is mostly against the CCP, but individual countries within the Union, they can be reached at directly and they can break away from the policies of the EU itself. Same thing with the United States. The United States of America, being again a constitutional republic, is technically 50 different countries united under a federal government. And the CCP understands that also each individual state is able to have its own, relations with other countries and so on like that to an extent. And they understand that if they make sister city programs, they can engage states directly, make trade deals with states directly, and that bypasses, of course, the problem of the federal government, which has become a lot more anti-CCP. If they even get a few states or a few countries within the EU, that plants the seeds of their influence within these big countries again. And so the CCP also, in addition to the US and going after Trump, in addition to this, they're also making moves in Canada in a very similar way using very similar narratives. In fact, Foreign Affairs Committee Minister in Canada, Melanie Joly, and Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, they met in Beijing. This is the first time they've done it since 2017 that in-person talks again have happened in China's capital involving a Canadian foreign minister. A Canadian readout on the meeting said, the two sides discussed their market access concerns and indicated a willingness to explore opportunities to strengthen engagement in the areas of trade, environmental protection, and climate response, and in combating the harm caused by illicit drugs such as fentanyl. Now, briefly on the note of fentanyl as well, remember that China has a big role, of course, in the fentanyl trade. They have the precursor chemicals, of course, for drugs like methamphetamine and other things which come from China, but they also have the synthetic drugs, fentanyl, other opioids, and so on, which also come from China. The Chinese Communist Party works very heavily with the Mexican drug cartels, and they also do the money laundering for the drug cartels. A lot of the money laundering takes place through Canadian casinos. This has been discovered, of course, in previous investigative reports, including, for example, the Vancouver model, looking into how the CCP does this. And so, of course, Canada plays a big role in Chinese criminal enterprise tied in with the fentanyl trade. And if they want to try to tackle that, actually it's a big deal. But on that note, too, China going to Canada, China going very heavily to Mexico. These will probably become much bigger issues, as well as other areas like Cuba, for example, where they're trying to make deeper relations as well. Because what happens is this: the Chinese Communist Party's theory of war under former CCP leader Mao Zedong was surround the cities with the countryside. Surround the cities with the countryside. In other words, and rather than go after the cities, right, of course, during the Chinese Civil War, where the CCP was trying to establish its power, they went after the countryside, where they could more easily gain ground, more easily take things, and by taking the countryside, they were able to isolate the cities, which made it so they choked them out. They have the same idea with the United States. Part of the idea with the United States is the CCP is going to Latin America very heavily. The CCP is going to Canada and trying to make deals there. And by, of course, going to the countries nearby the United States, they can cut off the United States in terms of relations with its neighbors. They've done this, again, very heavily in South America, parts of Central America, and they've been trying to do it more heavily in Canada and in Mexico. Now, the CCP, in addition to going after the US and Canada and so on just recently, also made a deal with the Philippines to cool their tensions over disputed territories in the South China Sea. The Philippines occupies the second Thomas Shoal, but China also claims it. And remember, look, earlier, just recently, in June this year, Chinese Coast Guards on motorboats repeatedly rammed and then boarded Philippine Navy boats. This was allegedly to prevent the transferring of food and other supplies to the Filipino Navy personnel at the BRP Sierra Madre. That's a ship they have an outpost on in that shoal. They ran it aground and made it like a base. But this cooling of tensions now between the CCP and the Philippines and the South China Sea is interesting, considering, again, how big of an issue the CCP's claims of the South China Sea are. They view the South China Sea as being part of their, historical ownership. This was, of course, rejected in certain claims, including by international courts, but the CCP is doing it regardless. And so for the CCP to just back off of that at this very key moment when tensions were reaching a boiling point, for the CCP to back off, that's a significant change in policy. So again, this charm campaign taking place all at once, right? At the same time, cooling of relations, trying to target individual U.S. states, making kind of peace with the Philippines, at least temporarily. And then what else is happening? The Chinese Communist Party suddenly as well is now reaching out to India, and what The Economist frames as part of a charm offensive to try to cool tensions with India as well. And notably, again, with India, the CCP also has territorial disputes. Now, according to The Economist, it says, in May, a new Chinese ambassador, Xu Feihong, arrived in Delhi after a hiatus of 18 months in which China's embassy there operated without one. Mr. Xu has since been on a charm offensive, meeting several members of the political elite. Again, the CCP suddenly is changing a lot of its policies, and it's trying to charm countries that have become a little more tense with it. Now, again, the list of recent CCP moves like this, it could go on for a while. They're launching a charm campaign right now. Now, look, many of these recent moves, they would be viewed as very drastic shifts in terms of the trend the CCP was on even just a few weeks ago. But again, it follows in the wake of the third plenum and of the CCP trying to woo foreign firms to come back to China. The CCP is trying to save its economy. And so they're putting on a smiley face and going to people they were just recently starting conflicts with and saying, hey, business is back on the table. That's the move they're doing right now. But the problem is it's two-faced, as it often is. Let me explain. Now look, briefly, even internally, the Chinese Communist Party is trying to get entrepreneurs to take action. And it's trying to convince the Chinese people to start spending their money again. And all of this, both inside China and outside China, looks again like a new type of charm campaign. Now on this, it looks also like it's not working. The Chinese Communist Party is not actually changing anything, really, in terms of its economy. The new push for domestic manufacturing, the regime wants to break its dependence on foreign goods. They're trying to, again, break even from Western technology. They don't want China to be dependent on anything from outside China. But it was already trying to do this. It was already trying to save its ailing real estate sector. It was already trying to blunt its looming banking crisis to get people spending money again. And already the methods it had tried were not working. Even if we just go by the unreliable surface numbers, it was not working. And the third plenum, where they were supposed to announce a big plan to change things, didn't introduce any changes to what was already not working. Now look, the analysis that swept Western media after the CCP's third plenum was that it did not provide any kind of strategy or roadmap to do things differently. Nothing tangible was done to actually fix the economic problems. And instead, as I've been mentioning, it talked about so-called social stability, domestic productivity, and a very, very big emphasis, maybe most importantly, on so-called socialism with Chinese characteristics. They just strengthened the rule of the Communist Party over the society. Now, in some ways, it seems the new agenda of the third plenum is more to prepare China for the inevitable. The Communist Party seems to realize it has no way out of the current economic troubles. The regime seems to be aware that if it continues growing more hostile on the world stage, it will continue to isolate itself from the free world. And it seems to understand as well that it's just creating an economic narrative to usher in this inevitable scenario. And the inevitable seems to be coming fast. I'll be talking more about this and the expected U.S. sanctions on China after we come back from a quick break.
Experts agree. One of the best ways to protect against financial uncertainty is to diversify your portfolio. Learn how physical gold and silver can secure your retirement funds from today's economic challenges with a gold IRA from American Hartford Gold. You can safeguard your wealth with no penalties or taxes when you transfer your current qualifying retirement accounts. Call now and our precious metals specialists will send you a free information kit, no cost or obligation. American Hartford Gold, a trusted industry leader with an A+ from the Better Business Bureau, has a 5-star rating from thousands of happy clients. Whether you are getting physical precious metals in a gold IRA or delivered to your doorstep, we offer only the highest quality gold and silver. For your peace of mind, we also offer a no-fee buyback commitment, a low-price guarantee, along with free shipping and free insurance. So don't wait. Call the number on your screen today and secure your financial future.
Welcome back. The Chinese Communist Party right now is launching a charm campaign, and they're targeting foreign leaders and foreign investors. But is this in order to prepare China for the inevitable economic crisis that's happening? Well, it seems this inevitable is coming fast. In addition to the already struggling Chinese economy, there's also the expected case that it's going to get worse. Part of this has to do with the growing trade disputes, and another big part is on the CCP's growing military threats on the global stage. As I briefly mentioned, the CCP is putting on a smiley face diplomatically, but on the other side, it's actually becoming extremely aggressive, more so than before. And it's on that latter note that the United States is right now planning for more sanctions on the Chinese Communist Party. Now look, remember, NATO just recently, they determined that the Chinese Communist Party is enabling Russia's war in Ukraine. And this means that if they want to end the war on their terms and not the CCP's terms, because again, you have two competing peace deals, one from the free world, one from the CCP, and the CCP again is trying to make it on its terms, then they need to stop the thing that's enabling Russia's war. They need to go after the thing that's letting it happen. So how do they do that? Well, they need to hit the Chinese economy. If the CCP is enabling the war, then the CCP is the way they stop the war, in other words. And word has it, they may even target Chinese banks. Now, just a few days ago, U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said that at the Aspen Security Forum that the U.S. is preparing additional sanctions on Chinese entities that are supporting Russia in the war with Ukraine. Watch.
China continues to be a major supplier of dual-use items to Russia's war machine. And we think China should stop because we think it is profoundly outside of the bounds of decent conduct by nation states, and China should not be on Team Russia when it comes to the war in Ukraine. I would reinforce here. In terms of next steps, what we have shown over time is that we have been prepared to tighten the screws. to apply sanctions against specific entities and individuals, including in China as well as in other countries, and that pattern will continue as we go forward. I think you can expect to see additional sanctions measures as we watch this picture continue to evolve in the coming weeks.
And here's more on U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan's comments from Bloomberg. They said U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said the U.S. is preparing new sanctions on Chinese entities that support Russia's war in Ukraine, and hinted that banks may be in the crosshairs. And he pointed to President Joe Biden's executive order late last year that allowed the U.S. Treasury Department to go after banks facilitating dual-use items aiding Russia's defense industry, and added that these powers had not been granted for nothing. And that's important because, again, what the CCP is being accused of is providing Russia with dual-use technologies. Dual-use meaning, they look benign on the surface, but you can use them for military equipment. And so in order to stop the arms trade happening right now, they have to go against these dual-use type technologies. While other senior U.S. officials at notes, including Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, have warned Beijing about potential sanctions, Sullivan's comments suggest new steps are near. It's coming from multiple directions, in other words. And look, a blow to Chinese banks right now, that would be devastating to the Chinese Communist Party and to its ambitions. Remember, right now, the Chinese Communist Party is facing a banking and debt crisis, and it needs the banks because, of course, that has to do with how it bails out the local Chinese provinces and local governments, which are also facing economic crisis because they were using these big, mega city projects and so on, building ghost cities and roads to nowhere and so on, and airports in the middle of nowhere, but they were doing it on debt, and the debt bubble is exploding, and that's, of course, causing the banking crisis. If they go after the banks, it's going to burst that bubble, or could at least, depending on how far they go with it. But it also looks like the sanctions and tariffs, they're not going to be limited to just the CCP backing Russia's war either. That's one part of it, a big part of it, but there's other stuff as well. The trade war is looking to expand elsewhere, and already it seems that investors are bracing for this. On semiconductors, for example, the chips you need for your electronics and your phones and high-tech equipment, notably even like missiles. The U.S. is considering tougher trade rules to rein in the Chinese chip industry, and investors are getting ready for it. BBC said this. They said technology stocks around the world have slumped on fears about the global computer chip industry. The sell-off came after a report that the Biden administration could be set to further tighten restrictions on exports of semiconductor equipment to China. In the U.S., it says the tech-heavy NASDAQ index closed at 2.7% lower on Wednesday, while chip stocks have also tumbled in Europe and Asia. And look, note this as well, when it comes to U.S. policies, countries will sometimes just wait for things, to change. Situations can change, in the U.S. depending on who's in office. If it's Republicans, they have one policy. If it's Democrats, they have another. And so if countries don't like U.S. policy, they just wait. They wait 4 years, they wait 8 years, they wait for our midterm elections, and then they expect policies to change depending on who the people are. Now look, with the U.S. presidential elections coming up, though, the Chinese Communist Party doesn't seem to have a lot of hope that the tough trading policies it's finding right now under Biden would change even if Trump came back in. It is a bipartisan issue. Republicans and Democrats are mostly on the same page when it comes to the CCP. Again, we'll see what happens with the elections, but hypothetically, if Trump does come back in, Trump is vowing much higher tariffs on Chinese-made cars, and his new running mate, J.D. Vance, has been fairly tough on the CCP. Vance even wants the U.S. military to focus on the Chinese Communist Party as a threat greater than Russia. He wants to shift the focus from Russia to the CCP. And notably, that seems to be a broadening position, especially with NATO now determining that the CCP is the enabler of Russia's war. FBI Director Christopher Wray, again, was under Trump and now under Biden. He has named the Chinese Communist Party as the primary threat to the United States. So back to that charm campaign of the CCP. The regime right now is playing a very different tune. They're talking about peace and cooperation, but the question is whether there's anything behind this. Remember, the pending sanctions, they're about the Chinese Communist Party fueling Russia's war in Ukraine. The sanctions and the tariffs, they're likely going to get worse if the CCP doesn't back off of this. And it seems that backing off is not on the regime's agenda. The Chinese Communist Party is not showing signs that it's going to be changing. Actually, if anything, it's showing signs that it's going to expand these types of hostilities. The Chinese Communist Party is getting more aggressive militarily. Now, I'll be talking more about what's next for the Chinese economy exclusively on EpicTV.com. That's the uncensored streaming platform of the Epic Times. So if you're watching on YouTube, Facebook, X, Rumble, there's a link in the description below. Click on that, get access to the rest of this episode. And not only that, you could also get access to my whole library of shows, our family-friendly movies, premium investigative reports, our hard-hitting documentaries, and issues that really matter, like the Chinese Communist Party's 100-year plan to defeat the United States, which I expose in my documentary, The Final War. The CCP is one of the biggest threats to this country. They're using things like video games, entertainment, movies, culture, all of this to subvert and influence the next generation. This unrestricted war against our country is one of the scariest but least understood issues of our time because it's not tangible. There's no tanks or bombs on the streets and so on. It's all being done through soft power and ideological subversion. Now, I've spent over a decade investigating the CCP's subversion, and it's such an important issue that I've dedicated my career to warning people about the threats of the CCP. If you'd like to find out more about what exactly the CCP is plotting against this country, watch The Final War. You can find the link in the description below, and I'll show you all the trailer before we go exclusively to EpicTV.com for the rest of this episode. I'll see you there.
The greatest threat facing the United States is the CCP.
The Epic Times investigation team had studied the CCP for years, but what we uncovered was yielding evidence beyond our imagination.
With Chairman Mao, with the Prime Minister, our talks have been characterized by frankness.
The Clinton administration said, oh, don't worry about it. This will be a poison pill for China.
China's strategic goal is to make sure that the U.S. has 4 enemies, and one of them must be a terrorist group.
We are giving of our life's blood so that the Chinese Communist Party can survive and thrive.